Hello my friends, I am the Synodic Scribe, your cataloger of all things lore, and this week I wanted to have a little bit of fun. A few days ago, someone on X, formerly known as Twitter, decided to make a post asking, what's the one piece of Final Fantasy XIV lore that's missing and it bothers you on a regular basis? Now, of course, being a Final Fantasy XIV lore channel, I had to leave a message and at least get part of my frustrations out, but I thought to myself, well, I'm a lore channel, so why limit myself to a single message on Twitter? Why not make an entire video and discuss not a single thing of the lore that I feel needs some work, but 3 things of Final Fantasy XIV lore that I feel could use some work. So, at Morgaine Final Fantasy XIV, I accept your challenge, and I shall list off some of my most long-standing caveats when it comes to the story of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, before I begin, I feel like I have to make the obvious statement of this isn't a series of notes that I feel are inconsistent. No, that would be an entire other video. There are quite a few things that I could absolutely address, but that's not the same as simply pointing out lore that is missing. The things I'll be discussing aren't incorrect, they're just not fully fleshed out, or not as fleshed out as they should be at this point in Final Fantasy XIV's story. After all, this has been a tale that's been told for the past decade. And I think you'll find that all 3 of my points here are actually quite old. And since we're on the topic of old, I feel like I should start with my response that I posted on Twitter, and that is, what's going on with Midgardsormr? Midgardsormr, Midi. No, we're gonna call him Midi for this video, it's more fun. So, Midi, what is going on with him, and why? And when I ask what's going on with him, I feel like I have to explain that, as far as the lore is concerned, Midi has proven to be extremely unique even when compared to other dragons, which should be important to us because the dragons themselves, or dragonkin, are one of the most unique races in the story of Final Fantasy XIV, given their heritage, backgrounds, etc., etc. So for Midi to already be an exceptional entity in a group of exceptional creatures, it kind of leaves a question of how or why. Of course, it's established that Midi arrived on the Sundered Source after the Sundering, which explains why the dragons are so much more naturally powerful than your typical person or creature within the world of Hydaelyn. But it's never exactly explained what kind of deal he and Hydaelyn made after his arrival. Oh sure, Hydaelyn said that he was free to leave his children here, raise them, and make this star a new home for dragonkind. But there seems to be a connection or conditions between him and her that were never fully elaborated on. Even when he's quote-unquote dead, he's still powerful enough to negate or smother the blessing of light, leading to the unfortunate events in post-ARR. And that's another thing entirely. Despite dying, Midi never actually died. In fact, his soul lingered within the material plane instead of returning to the ethereal realm. Not only that, he seems to have the ability to choose to reincarnate himself after death, unlike everyone else. I don't know any other dragon that has this ability. So, when it comes to Midi's missing lore, I kind of want to know what was the deal he made with Hydaelyn, and what benefits did he gain from it, if any. How was his soul or life cycle different from every other dragon we know? And how is he still this powerful even after death? Questions like that have been rattling in my brain for years when it comes to Midi and his existence in the story of Final Fantasy XIV. That's not to say that I dislike him, not at all. In fact, as far as characters go, he's one of my favorite early game characters in ARR and Heavensward. But I do feel like a lot of what makes him is missing, and a little bit of context, I feel, would go a long way. Unfortunately, within Stormblood, the writers conveniently put Midgardsormr back to sleep after the Omega raid was over, so by Horace Velger's own confession, Midi has entered a deep slumber from which not even he knows when his father will wake up. He could be asleep for a few months, or he could be asleep for a few decades or even centuries. They don't know, and well, how convenient that now he's asleep in a story that is within a time bubble, in which time is more or less not progressing. So we may never get the answers to these questions. Maybe Midi will remain a mystery forever, but I would be curious to learn more about him and his place within the world of Final Fantasy XIV for sure. Missing lore number 2. What's going on with light and darkness? Now, to understand why I would be confused about the aspects of light and darkness within the world of Final Fantasy XIV, you have to understand that I'm looking at this from the perspective of someone who's been trying to pay attention and follow this since 1.0, 2.0, back in 14's beginning. Did you know that the pages within Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1, referring to etherology, never talk about light and darkness once? Those words never come up. Now, of course, those pages expand upon the 6 elements, and even the astral and umbral polarities, active energy and passive energy. However, light and darkness is never brought up, which I always found was a bit strange because, well, within Final Fantasy XIV and most Final Fantasy games in general, the aspects of light and darkness or their duality is often a key part or major feature of the story itself. And of course, all the while, the MSQ is using words like light and darkness quite liberally, isn't it? The light must conquer the darkness must not overwhelm the light, and then I start to wonder, like, are these actually types of energy, or are you just trying to describe 2 different states of moral objection? ARR passed and we didn't get much, Heavensward passed and we didn't get much, Stormblood passed and we didn't get much. But it wasn't until Shadowbringers when there was a dramatic shift in writing and writing focus that we finally got some information on light and darkness as they tried to ascribe them to the astral and umbral polarities. I found this cutscene confusing more than helpful for a multitude of reasons. The biggest one being that the keywords in this cutscene change based off of the language it's being translated into, which is not necessarily a good thing. But the most confusing part to me was, if we are going to try to prescribe light and darkness to astral and umbral now, why was that never elaborated on earlier? The story and books of Final Fantasy XIV and even the side content had multiple opportunities to tell us more about the etheric aspects of light and darkness, of what they mean to us, what do they mean to the world of Final Fantasy XIV, and we're not really given anything until Shadowbringers, and I always wondered why. Why is it only just now that we're discussing this? And now that we are discussing it, why is half of the information Urianger is giving us not making much sense? Like, for example, when he says that many scholars had prescribed astral to light and umbral to darkness, and he suggests that we've had it wrong this whole time and that it's backwards, I kind of wanted to know why. How were researchers so wrong for so long? I refuse to believe that a bunch of etherologists over in Old Charlian, for example, just looked at light and assumed it must be astral. No, these are researchers. These are people with statistics and charts and measurements to kind of dictate what they're saying and thinking. Like, if you're going to say, or if you're going to suggest that everyone got it wrong for so long, well, you're gonna have to give me a little bit more context, Urianger. In fact, this got so confusing that some other lore personalities in the Final Fantasy XIV community started suggesting that the writers of Final Fantasy XIV had created 2 distinct types of light and darkness. You had like the capital L and D, light and darkness, which are like the two warring primordial energies that are like interlocked in a cosmic dance for all eternity. And then you have like the lowercase L and D, light and darkness, which is this new astral and umbral Shadowbringers addressed energy. So, light and darkness went undefined for a very, very long amount of time, for about 6 years about, and then, when it finally is addressed in Shadowbringers, it's given a sort of half-baked explanation and never is really fully expanded upon, and it never really addresses why it was inconsistent up to this point anyway. So, personally, I would love, maybe this is the perfect opportunity, my friends, for us to create or be given an updated ethereal chart. Like, let's get an updated ethereal chart showcasing not only the 6 elements, the astral and umbral polarities, but light and darkness and how they fit into the entire equation. Maybe that will help in the future. Personally, I'm curious to see if and when they ever address this in the future. Probably not, but I would appreciate a bit more exposition, so to say. Suddenly telling me that darkness is astral and that light is umbral without any previous context or information just kind of feels like it was made up on the spot instead of fully thought out. And I would love to hear the fully thought out version of light and darkness within the universe of Final Fantasy XIV. That is, of course, if we're still going to keep using those words over and over again within the story, for sure. And then, lastly, lore number 3. We need to talk about Gridania. So, Gridania, as far as I understand, is the least popular of the 3 starting city-states in Final Fantasy XIV, and honestly, I can understand why. Of the 3 of them, I believe Gridania is in fact the smallest, with the fewest visitable zones and fewest things to see and engage with. Of course, it's very classic for players to gather around the Limsa Aetheryte because of it being right next to the market boards, and everyone likes to idle there and show off their stuff. And that's what makes Limsa popular, for the most part. And then, of course, you have Ul'dah, which is a very expansive city with a bazaar, a royal promenade, an arena, and all these different things that kind of give it spice and life. And then you have Gridania, which is just a big forest with a few huts and some NPCs that will give you the stink eye now and then. Which I feel is very disappointing, because from a lore point of view, I personally understand what makes Gridania historical and important within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. I even understand why they put up with the elementals. The MSQ seems to have done its best to make the elementals look as evil as possible, and by extension, make Gridanians look like idiots for doing as they say, which is very unfortunate. Because whenever I say the elementals aren't that bad, I'm always having to go back and use sources that aren't like in the MSQ, that aren't observable. Because most of the good and interesting things that the elementals do is either in one of the books or side stories or something. It doesn't come up in the actual MSQ, which I feel is unfortunate because Limsa Lominsa had a really big arc with the pirates and the kobolds and reconciling their differences. Ul'dah had a big moment where of course there was the attempted coup, the betrayal of the Warrior of Light, and having to help and maintain peace alongside the Sultana, which again was very interesting. Gridania, the city-state, has never really had the chance to do something huge like that. No, not to me, at least. In the beginning, I thought that the elementals were going to be used in a more of a European or English Fae type way, where they are malicious at first glance, but then you start to see how helpful and useful they are if you follow their rules and do as they say every now and then. And then, of course, Shadowbringers came along with the pixies and everything. I'm like, oh, well, there goes Gridania's Fae route. Gridania, I found your missing character development. It's over on the first. And then, of course, there is the Undercity of Gelmora, which is an entire other sect that I feel has been completely abandoned and unexplored. A huge part of Gridanian history that is told to us and we know still exists in some fashion, yet is never talked about. And I feel that is a terrible shame because the Duskwhite Elizin are there for a reason, and it would be fun to learn more about Gelmora, Gridania's heritage, and what maybe embracing that heritage would mean for the city-state moving forward. But again, this is just postulation. I feel like Gridania has had a great deal of missed opportunities, not only within the MSQ, but just in general. I feel like most players have simply chalked Gridania as being that place where the xenophobic idiots who listen to the evil spirits live. And as someone who loves the lore of Final Fantasy XIV, they are so much more than that. And honestly, comparatively, it's not just against Limsa and Ul'dah. Of course, I'm comparing them because they are the three starting city-states, but Alamigo has gotten more development than Gridania. Ishgard has gotten more development than Gridania. I would argue even Doma has gotten more cultural development than Gridania has since its conception, and that's a shame. I hope one day something. Just give Gridania something so that people will be like, oh, the elementals have been helping us out, but it's never been addressed properly. Well, my friends, that is 3 aspects of Final Fantasy XIV's lore that I personally feel is missing or could use a little bit of polish, a little bit of addition to kind of really flesh things out and show us give us a better explanation as to why things are the way they are. And those are just the 3 I could think of most clearly off the top of my head. There are others, but instead of me rambling on more about those, I want to hear what you think. What aspects of Final Fantasy XIV lore do you think are missing and you think could be better explained or addressed at some point later on in the MMO's future? Thanks to the end of Endwalker, and thanks to the conclusion of this decade-long story, Final Fantasy XIV's storytelling and world building is in a unique position to really get its hands dirty with the world building and character development of a lot of different people, places, and things. I want them to do this, and I want to hear what you think they should do with that ability. So, leave your statements down in the comment section below. I look forward to looking at those, and I hope all of you have an amazing week. As always, I'm continuing to work on more lore content, and until the day comes that we share that experience, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and share this with your fellow adventurers? With your help, I'll try to reach out even further and bring even greater stories to you. Although, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Amina Viltaria, Slippers, Potato, Sage Mouse, Sinalv Bagel, Cizani, and Travan Shea, with an additional nod to the scholarships on screen. Links to things like my Twitter and that of my channel artist Caddy can be found in the description. Thank you all for your viewership as well as your support, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. Class dismissed.